All right, welcome into episode number 162 of the Agency Journey podcast. This is Gray, and this week I have the pleasure of bringing back for a part two, Pete Brand from MINDSCAPE. Pete, how you doing, man?
I'm doing really good. Thanks for having me back, man.
I'm glad to have you on. I'll challenge the very well or very good that you're doing here in a little bit as we get to it. But and that's one of the big things that the big reason that I wanted to bring you on was to kind of talk about the life of an agency owner and how we balance kind of that stress with what we've got going on in our personal lives and like mental health side of things / just kind of personal development side of things. But before we get to that, we talked a little about MINDSCAPE and some of the things that you guys are up to when we connected here at the beginning of the year. But where any big updates on the agency itself? Anything new and exciting with MINDSCAPE?
I think when I talked with you, we were really simplifying our sales process and being a lot more structured about the way we were approaching it. We had literally 20 consecutive weeks of new business that we brought in that led up to about the middle of June, wow. Which was a little insane, but it really made me a big believer in having a sales process that you actually follow and use a CRM to track it. It was really, really solid. Then, of course, we hit the summer doldrums and nobody's thinking about business again. And now we're back in fall going, all right, guys, it's going to get cold soon. Let's start thinking about business. So as always, the agency world is up and down, but no, it's been going good. We won an impact award in the second quarter from HubSpot for sales enablement, which was pretty awesome. We helped a client crush it. I might get these numbers reversed, but 23% revenue increase and a 17% close rate improvement after helping them implement the CRM, which they had tried 7 or 8 other CRMs or a bunch of them, and none of them ever worked, and this one was right on, so it was great.
That's 17% is huge from a close rate perspective.
Yeah.
To make that jump, what was it, like standardizing the sales process, or was it like what was the big thing that switched the trigger there?
It was standardizing the sales process, but giving a tool, having a tool that they actively used as an organization to track all of the interactions. So they weren't relying on memory anymore, and they were just had a process, just like we learned from our process.
Right. Okay. Huh. That's crazy. You mentioned, it was funny, you mentioned the the summer slow time, which definitely hits here in the States, and I didn't realize until we got into the software space with ZenPilot, formerly Do Inbound, and started working with a lot of European customers that summer holidays are a real thing. To us, things definitely slow down in the agency space here in the States. Things would slow down a little bit, and you'd have 4th of July as a bad time, and then you'd have people going on family vacations kind of throughout July and first part of August for the most part. Some people end of June, and but trying to get anything push through with a whole bunch of, especially with a software, a whole bunch of European customers. Like the holidays there aren't like a long weekend here or there, or maybe a week off. It's like we're taking 3 weeks off and going somewhere else. It's like literally nothing gets done during the summer. I probably just insulted a whole bunch of people who were over there, but that was a cultural experience that was kind of funny to learn from.
Yeah, I don't know that so much that you're insulting them as complimenting them on their understanding of how life really should be.
I think it's amazing to be able to take. You think about trying to take 3 weeks in a row off, and I've done that. I think the only times that I've done that is after the kids. We get 3 little kids right now, and have taken actually after the most recent one. I get most of 3 weeks off, but was on a little bit after week 1, which is probably not the healthiest way to go about things. But yeah.
I can honestly say in the 30 years that I've been working after being out of high school, I've never taken 3 weeks off, and that's sad.
Yeah. Well, so here was the thing that kind of I think initially prompted me wanting to talk about this with you was when I learned about the hiking thing and you getting into going hiking every day. So first of all, is that still is that still something that you do? Are you hiking every day?
I'm not hiking every day.
Okay.
But I'm hiking a lot. I just got done leading as a hiking leader for Make-A-Wish Foundation, where I trained a group of hikers over the course of about 2.5 months to be able to hike a 21-mile hike in one day. And we just Just did that 2 weekends ago.
Wow.
And it was a phenomenal experience. But yeah, so I'm still getting out in the woods as much as I can.
Okay. So, um, I'm trying to figure out the best place to start here, and that might be the best place to start is what got you into hiking in the first place. And then ultimately, kind of just want to talk about some of like what are the healthy practices, or what are the things that that we've learned from mistakes and from trying to make those a little bit better, as far as how do we balance running an agency and the day-to-day stress of that with also being a well-rounded person and not succumbing to the stress and buying into the, not that anyone I think consciously buys into it, but we kind of subconsciously, it's very easy to fall into the trap of however the agency is doing that defines who I am as a person and takes over part of that. That definitely becomes a big part of our identity, especially if we don't guard against having some separation there. So maybe we start with what initially got you into hiking.
Sure. Well, I always used to camp and do stuff like that when I was younger. And then all of a sudden you have kids and you get into life and you stop doing it. It got a little bit introspective. And I thought, why, as we get older and have more resources and more control over our schedules, do we stop doing the things that brought us lots of joy when we were younger? And it didn't make any sense to me. And it was probably right around that same time that I kind of came to that realization that we were going through a buyout and buying out business partners. We had minority business partners who had been with us for about 8 years. And we made the decision that we were going to attempt to buy them out. And it took us about a year to be able to work that out. And it was, it was challenging. I can't really say a lot, obviously, but it was really stressful and challenging. And the last 3 months of the buyout negotiations, my business partner ended up having a really serious injury and almost passed away. And so I was dealing with it a lot on my own. And then we got out of the buyout and we were back on our own. And I was excited, or at least felt like I should be excited. And then all of a sudden my body just, took a dump. And it was all of the stress and all of the anxiety and everything that went through that entire year caught up to me and just crushed me. And finally got to the point I went and talked to a therapist, and the therapist was explaining to me, like, you seem to be a little intense, and have you always been this way? And I'm like, yeah. And he says, do you think it's healthy? And I was like, well, it better be. And it was, but he really helped me understand the need to decompress and have little times of decompression throughout the day, so that you can help, mitigate some of the anxiety and the stress that you experience when you're running really hot all the time. And then that led me into getting out in the woods and just kind of bathing in nature and beauty and being by myself and just being at peace and realizing that, that really is living and not the stress and anxiety that I get all wrapped up in. Mm-hmm. So it was a huge, huge difference for me.
Was that like the first thing that you went to, was getting outside? I mean, because a lot of people have different hobbies or different ways that they try to. And I think especially, at least from my personal experience and people I've talked to, like, we live so much on the computer that the farther I get away from the computer, the easier it is. But is that the first thing that you went to, or did you think about it strategically at all as far as here's what I can go do to decompress, or was that just instantly the answer?
No, I actually started out with meditation. I started studying about transcendental meditation, which I've heard a lot of really good things about, and I didn't want to pay the money to go through the course. And plus I'm kind of cynical. So I just figured out, how to do it without going through a class. And I would do that in my office sometimes when people would walk in, it would be awkward. But what I really realized is, as I was walking and hiking and moving, it's very similar to a meditation, especially when you're out in the woods and, you just kind of get lost in that trail and looking at stuff. And I found that I was a lot better at that, because my brain at times is so scattered and all over the place. It's hard to get it to quiet down. I still do meditate from time to time, especially when I'm having those really stressful times. But I feel like a nice 8, 9, 10 mile hike can really get you in that meditative state. And afterwards, I feel at absolute peace when I'm done. So I love it.
Right. Well, so what I wanted to do, I don't think that there's, that's not true. I was going to say, I don't think there's that many people that would debate or say, like, we shouldn't get a breakaway and decompression isn't important. And that might not be true, actually. There probably are In fact, I can think of some people who, and whatever the excuse is, it's I'm young, like this is the time in life when I can work this way, or like I'm just wired differently, I can do it. But I think there's enough empirical data and evidence to say that it actually is good and healthy to take a break. But what I kind of want to do is throw some of the objections at you and just figure out, like, how do we, not as proof across the board that this is the best way to combat it, but from your personal experience, like how do you do this stuff? So obviously the biggest one is like, I just don't have time for it. How did you fit in? And you said an 8 or 9 mile hike. I'm sure that might not be where it started. But how do you fit that into your schedule, and how did you start doing that? Was it hard to start the habit because of that?
Yeah, I kind of had some of that head trash where I wanted to be a martyr and say, I don't have time for that. I'm too busy building the agency, making sure my employees are doing well, getting out in the community, making an impact there, doing all this stuff. And so I really felt like, and I know it seems like when you're making the excuse of I don't have enough time, that it's because you're doing all this good for other people. But the bottom line is, if you aren't taking care of yourself, you don't have the capacity or ability to give or serve other people very well. And I really learned that when I was having my anxiety problems for about a year after that, after getting away from the partners, it was really, really difficult to get out of that dark place. So, but yeah, so I think what we have to realize is if we don't find the time to invest in ourselves and take care of ourselves and make sure that we're in a good place to be able to effectively serve other people, we're not going to be able to do it. So I really kind of do think that the excuse of I don't have enough time is bullshit, because we can find the time. I was waking up at 5 o'clock in the morning and hiking 3 or 4 miles, and then I would hike at 10 o'clock at night and maybe do another 3 or 4 miles. My wife was really understanding. In the very beginning, she didn't get it, but she started to when she started to see that I was a better product in the end, and it all worked out really well.
Was it always solo hiking? Did you start with somebody?
No, I really enjoy solo hiking. I get more and more people now that ask to go with me, which is really nice to be able to go out and chat with them. But being out there by myself is better than anything. And I was scared in the beginning. I mean, I got a big bushy beard and all this other stuff. And so it's not like I'm going to worry about human beings or whatever, but you have the fear of the unknown when you're out in the woods. And once I realized there's really not anything to be scared of, it just went a lot easier. So,
man, what a journey. You were telling me before we hit record here just about putting together like this worksheet right now. So obviously things have evolved. Well, actually, let me ask that question too. When was this? How many years ago did you go through this experience and start hiking?
I've been hiking for the last 3 or 4 years on and off, but when I really made my commitment, it was January 1st, 2017. And that was when I made the commitment to hike every single day, set a goal of hiking 2,200 miles. And I actually, when I got through, I had the flu 2 different periods, so the stomach flu. And I didn't skip hiking. I waited until I threw up because I knew I would have about an hour where you feel better. And so I waited. I took advantage of that hour. I went and hiked 3 miles, came back, and then was sick again. But at least I kept the track going. I didn't want to stop. But it was remarkable. It's amazing, first of all, how physically strong you get when you're doing something like that, how much the stress just melts away. And I went through an entire year where I really didn't feel or experience any stress. And it was just because I was giving myself a constant dose of decompression time and focusing on the things that helped me feel grounded and in the moment. So it was pretty amazing.
Hey, I hope you're enjoying this episode of Agency Journey. I'm Andrew. I'm a co-host here on the podcast, and I'm a founder of ZenPilot. If you enjoy this podcast, we would love a 5-star review and a comment on where you're listening from and what you're getting out of this podcast. You could drop that over on iTunes or Stitcher, wherever you're listening to the podcast today. And while you're there, make sure you subscribe to the podcast so you get the updates as they come out. And if you want to engage with other agency owners that are enjoying this podcast, join our community. Head over to agencyjourneyinsiders.com reinventing.com. That's going to take you to our special private Facebook group, a collection of owners from around the world who are on their own journey to build their own agency. So head over to agencyjourneyinsiders.com, join the group today. And if you're at a point where you're ready for some help and you want to implement processes and systems to scale your agency, you can head over to ZenPilot.com/free training. And there you can watch a special 19-minute training presentation where we walk through the exact process that we use at ZenPilot to help agencies implement processes and systems so they can scale their business without reinventing the wheel for every client. And that allows agency owners to pull out of the weeds and spend more time working on their business. So hope you're enjoying the content here today. We'd love it if you join our community, and we can't wait to hear where you are in your agency journey. Now back to the show.
So then what I was going to ask was, you mentioned this worksheet that you put together to try and kind of work through the things that come up, obviously the day-to-day stressors that come up. Can you tell us about what that looks like, or what prompted putting that together?
Yeah, it was, like typically with me, as the evening goes on and it gets close to bedtime, that's when the anxiety will start to increase, start to think about the next day, all the things you have to do, the things that may not have gone right. And then it's really hard to shut down your brain and go to sleep. So I realized that when I am experiencing anxiety, it's all just thoughts, and I'm putting way too much emotion and feeling into those thoughts. So I basically just created a worksheet that's got a few different questions that I can walk through, and I'll give them to you really quick. The first one is, what is the challenge? So that helps you get out on paper, what it is that's really bothering you. And then the next question is, what thought is driving the anxiety? And I like to really fill that out, because typically when I'm feeling anxious, it's like one thought leads to another thought, to another, and all of them are more and more negative until the point where the world ends or something. But it helps you get it out and look at it. And when I look at it, I realize how ridiculous it is. But then it goes to the next question, which is, it reasonable that outcome is imminent? And most of the time, no. It's just something that we're fabricating in our minds. So then the next question is, what can be done to prevent the negative outcome? So that helps you get into problem-solving mode and start to make a list of different actions or activities that you can complete. And then the final question is, what action can be taken in the next 24 hours? Because especially if it's at night when I'm feeling anxious before I go to bed, if I have a list of 3 or 4 or 5 items that I'm going to tackle first thing in the morning, then my brain can go take a rest and I can forget about it, because I know I've got it captured and I don't have to worry about what I'm going to do next.
Right. That's a really cool worksheet. It's kind of like, and I don't know if this is the goal, this might be a little bit different, but like Tim Ferriss talks about, and I'm sure it didn't originate from him, but maybe it did, I don't know, negative visualization, or just kind of picturing what's the worst case scenario. And that's a way to become comfortable with, what are the possible negative outcomes that could happen here, and also then figure out what is the likelihood that actually happens. Very, very small, or if it is not small, what are the, what's the action plan to get around it?
Right. Well, it feels to me like business owners, or especially agency owners, we're kind of control freaks, right? And
100%.
Yeah, and anxiety is caused because we feel like there's a lack of control. So I feel like that sheet gets me back to the point where, okay, like here are the things that I can actually control to prevent that, or mitigate the likelihood of that negative event occurring. So it kind of pulls me back to the point where I realize I do have some control, maybe not over the circumstances or the environment, but I do over the actions I take. And it's a practice to get back to that and get more centered.
Right. Have you found, and I'm sure everyone's wired differently, has community been, we've talked a lot about things that you've kind of done largely on your own. Obviously, with you talk to a therapist, which is a great first step, and your wife was supportive. So there's certainly some community. Have you, has any part of this been conversations with other business owners or other people in similar situations, or has it largely been kind of that small, tight community, and then you kind of having these daily practices on your own?
Oh no, yeah, I was part of a mentoring program for the last 3 years. I just graduated last summer in 2017, but basically we get matched up with a retiring or an older CEO who's been extremely successful in an entrepreneurial business. And we meet with them every 2 weeks to be able to talk through our business, share our P&L, whatever, just to get some guidance. And I really felt like he was my shoulder to cry on. I still remember a conversation where I was like, man, it's so stressful. The pressure is just about crushing me. I don't know how I'm going to do. When does this stuff end? And he looked across the table and said, I'll let you know if it ever does. And I said, so this is what I signed up for? And he goes, yep. And I said, okay, I can handle that as long as I, can realize that it doesn't have to do with me. So I do have a really, really solid community. And I'm not one of those people that's going to say things are going great when they're not. I'm very open and transparent. And I would rather tell somebody, the real way that it feels instead of just making up some stuff.
Right. So 2 things that I think this principle, I talked about this a lot with people at Inbound here a couple weeks ago. And I don't know if I would ever, it seems like this is something that I've kind of realized more in the last, specifically this year, 2018, is that the reward for talking to a lot of younger agency owners at Inbound, and the feeling that I got, it sounded like myself when we started the agency 7 years ago, like we just need to get through this first year, and then we'll have the traction, and like everything will start to pan out and even out and stuff. And I didn't really realize until this past year, maybe consciously put it together, that the reward for doing your job well and the business growing is that you get more complex, larger problems. That's always the reward for success. The reward for failure might be that you get another opportunity to simplify and move back, and that's obviously not what we're shooting for. But the more that you succeed, or the more that at least externally succeed, the reward is just bigger implications, because business is a huge momentum game, just larger implications for the actions and decisions that you make and take. So there's never a point where this gets... The things that you're doing today, after you've done them for a year, those things get easier, but the new things that you're doing are just as challenging as they are now. So it's not like this is something that you can put off and just deal with, and then all of a sudden life will be easy and pan out. It just it's increasing complexity, not reducing complexity. So I think that realization and that story that you talked about, the CEO, like that same thing, that this doesn't go away regardless of how externally successful you are, kind of highlights the need to figure out what are we going to do to deal with this now, not put it off for the future and assume that we'll be able to solve it. So that stuck out to me right away from that story.
Yeah, no, yeah, I completely agree. It's kind of like, if you want to use that excuse of I don't have time, look in the mirror and say, how's that working out for me?
Right.
And
right.
You can't keep doing the same stuff and piling on and on and on. It's not going to get any better until you figure out a way to deal with it. And frankly, everybody else will thank you for taking the time to figure that out.
Right. The other thing that stuck out to me, though, was the idea of contrast, that we don't know what light is without dark. We don't know what hot is without, obviously all the cliches for contrast. But when you are more honest with people about how you're doing, it means that when you say I'm doing well, at least in my experience, people are more excited, or it's easier to relate. It's easier to build trust when people know, like, you're just shooting straight. And some people will, I'm sure that they're the people who are like, well, why are you Debbie Downer here? And you can't just say, like, I'm having a good time. It kind of brings my mood down. But I love that. The people who are just honest about it. That doesn't mean that every single person that you talk to, you're laying out you need to pick and choose the right situations, but just be honest about how things are going right now. And that, to me, especially in the marketing space, and I don't know, because this is largely the world that I've lived in. I haven't bounced around to different industries. I don't know if it's just a function of we're in marketing, and the perception of marketing is that we dress things up to the nth degree and make them look as good as they can possibly be. I'm sure part of it is just human nature, but that same thing carrying over into, like, every agency out there, statistics say can't all be going the best that they've ever gone.
Right.
So we know that it's not all true, and yet that same lie perpetuates itself.
I know. I feel like some of that stuff is generational. And again, I'm not trying to insult anybody, but like you weren't. But I feel like the the people that have been around in doing this for a much longer time tend to be more concerned with appearances, and you can't tell people that you're not doing well, because then they won't want to hire you, because then they'll think your company's going to go out of business or whatever. Like, there's this
Right.
fear of actually being able to be real. And I feel as though, the millennial generation, and even some of the Generation X, I'm an Xer, but I feel like some of us are more able to be open and transparent with how things are really going, because frankly, people like to help people out who need it,
Right.
and I think if you're able to be vulnerable and talk about the way that it really is, people aren't going to push you away. Chances are they're going to see how they can help. And so there are some other benefits that come from that, I think.
Right. Well, I think that's a really good point. And this has been helpful just to have the conversation. So I want to kind of ask this question for you as we wrap up, Pete, which is, you're talking to someone in my situation, or someone who's even an earlier stage in the business, in their first couple of years of the business, really at any point, but and they're feeling that it's not, they're not to the point where they are, they probably don't think of themselves as being depressed. Maybe not, if they went and saw someone, they wouldn't necessarily say they wouldn't say they're depressed, but they feel the weight of the business, and they feel like this is a climb that just never ends, and don't know where to go or who to talk to about that. They might have a spouse or someone who they kind of have hints of those conversations with, but feel like, and especially that family dynamic can be tricky too, where you feel like you need to put on a certain face to, especially as an entrepreneur, to reassure your spouse that things are okay. I guess what would be, if we put together like that same kind of worksheet for, here's the action plan in terms of how would we sequence this, and here's how I would approach this. Any thoughts on where you would tell them to start and then go from there?
Yeah, I think the first place I would tell them to start is realize that whether it's depression or whether it's anxiety, it's just a thought, and it's a thought that's popping up in your head, and you're attaching meaning to it, and you're attaching emotion to it. So I think the first thing is to notice that and recognize that that's what's happening, and then just dissect it. I mean, if your brain is going to be the thing that creates the thought, it's also going to be the thing where you can poke holes in the theory of that thought and realize that it's not really that true. So we give the power to the thoughts that are negative just as much as we do the thoughts that are positive. So we have, as control freaks, right? We have control. We just have to figure out how to navigate it and get to the point where we have clarity and understanding.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. I haven't heard a lot of people talk about this before, that like just recognizing that it's just a thought, it's just something happening in your head. Does that come from TM, or where does that come from?
Have another mentor that I've been working with probably for the last 6 or 7 years, who I believe has a really good command of life and presence and all that stuff. And he's actually worked with me to recognize those thoughts and recognize those events as they're occurring, and not try to stop them, but like feel them and realize what it really is and what's at the crux of that issue or that feeling. And I think the more aware we are, the better we can navigate. It's just like, you just have to know, you got to have some tools and know really what's happening. Because anxiety or depression or whatever, like, you're either living in the future with anxiety or you're living in the past with depression. But if you take a moment to just be in the moment and realize there's not a lion that's going to eat me. I actually feel pretty good with my body. I've hydrated well. I'm watching my nutrition. I'm getting my sleep. I'm moving and exercising. If you're taking care of those things, I think it's a lot easier. You're in control of the main elements that are going to determine your quality of life. But I feel like then you can take control of those thoughts too, and just start to realize when you're going down a negative path, and pull yourself back a little bit.
Yeah, that's really good. That's for me, I don't spend as much time as I would like to on my own outside. I enjoy fishing a lot and do very little of it. But I coach high school baseball, and that time for me, preparing practice plans and communication with parents and players, that part is not relaxing. The part to me that is the most relaxing is the actual 2 hours of practice time where we're out on the field and it's just follow the script. You're using your body, you're interacting, there's energy, a lot of positive energy going on for the most part, as long as we're having a good practice. And that to me has been one of the things that helps to kind of keep me collected and put together is that opportunity to get out. So figuring out whatever that physical outlet is, I think is absolutely huge.
Yeah, no, that's great.
Good. Well, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing about this. Pete, I think just having the conversation is helpful in the specific kind of plan of attack that you shared in your story is helpful. If people want to check out, obviously, the agency, wearemindscape.com, we'll have that in the show notes. Is there anywhere else you'd want to point people, Pete?
Sure. I have a podcast that's hosted on Podbean, which is Hike Your Own Hike. And those are, 5 to 10 minute episodes when I'm out hiking and have a thought and I just share it. I capture a lot of that stuff for my kids because I'm an old dad and I have 5 kids. And I know I'm not going to be on the planet forever. And I'd like to be able to create digital content so they can at least learn some of the things that I'm picked up over time and apply that to their lives, even when I'm not here any longer. A little morbid, but I think about that stuff.
That's awesome. Cool. So, Hike Your Own Hike, right?
Yep. And it's on Podbean
okay.
I haven't really pushed it out there a bunch, but
yep.
Got about 30 episodes on there.
Okay. That's awesome. Well, we'll make sure we throw that in the show notes as well. Pete, thanks so much for taking the time and jumping back on. It was great to have you.
Thanks again, man. I appreciate it. Have a great day.